Right now, at this exact moment, Chinese Type 055 destroyers are crossing into Iranian territorial waters in the Persian Gulf for the first time in history. Beijing announced this as a routine port visit to Bandar Abbas. Washington called it a dangerous escalation during peak U.S.-Iran tensions. This is the largest Chinese surface combatant deployment to the Middle East ever recorded, and it's happening 72 hours after American carriers repositioned for potential strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. The alliance America didn't anticipate is materializing in real time, and the strategic calculations governing Middle East power dynamics just fundamentally changed. Let me walk you through exactly what happened. At 0847 hours local time on Tuesday, March 3, 2026, commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs detected 3 People's Liberation Army Navy warships, 2 Type 055 Renhai-class guided missile destroyers, and 1 Type 903A replenishment vessel, passing through the Strait of Hormuz westbound into the Persian Gulf. The lead destroyer, identified as CNS Nanchang Pennant No. 101, transmitted standard maritime notifications to regional traffic control. By 11:30 hours, Iranian state media published footage showing IRGC Navy speedboats escorting the Chinese flotilla in what Tehran described as coordinated naval exercises. At 14:05 hours, China's Ministry of National Defense issued a terse statement confirming the deployment, characterizing it as enhancing regional stability and deepening comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran. 40 minutes later, U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain released an unusual public statement noting they were monitoring the situation closely, using language typically reserved for hostile actors, rather than describing routine Allied movements. By 1800 hours, the Chinese warships had anchored at Bandar Abbas Naval Base, where Iranian officials conducted formal welcoming ceremonies broadcast on state television. At 2015 hours, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "China is making a big mistake getting involved in Iran. They will regret this decision. We are watching closely." The timeline reveals coordination level suggesting weeks or months of planning, not improvised response to current crisis. To understand the significance, you need to understand what China just deployed into the Persian Gulf. The Type 055 Renhai-class destroyer represents China's most advanced surface combatant, a warship that fundamentally changed naval power calculations in the Indo-Pacific and is now projecting into the Middle East. Each destroyer displaces 13,000 tons fully loaded, making them larger than American Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and roughly equivalent to Ticonderoga-class cruisers. The Nanchang and its sister ship mount 112 vertical launch cells capable of firing multiple missile types, YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles with 540-kilometer range and supersonic terminal sprint speeds exceeding Mach 2. 5. HHQ-9B long-range surface-to-air missiles providing area air defense out to 250 kilometers, U-8 anti-submarine rockets, and most significantly, land attack cruise missiles similar to American Tomahawks with precision strike capability against targets 1,500 kilometers inland. The ship's dual-band radar systems, S-band for volume search and X-band for fire control, provide 360-degree coverage with simultaneous tracking of hundreds of targets. The combat management system integrates with China's Beidou satellite navigation constellation, providing targeting data independent of GPS that American forces could theoretically deny. These are not patrol boats or frigates making symbolic gestures. These are capital warships with offensive strike capability against land targets, anti-access systems capable of threatening American naval aviation, and defensive systems sophisticated enough to challenge American air superiority in constrained battle space like the Persian Gulf. China just positioned the capability to strike Saudi oil facilities, Emirati ports, American bases in Qatar and Bahrain, and Israeli assets, all from Iranian territorial waters, where American forces cannot operate without triggering direct confrontation with both Iran and now potentially China. Here's why this matters strategically, and why American planners are recalculating everything they thought they understood about Middle East contingencies. For 3 decades, American military dominance in the Persian Gulf rested on unchallenged assumption. If crisis escalated to military confrontation, the United States possessed overwhelming conventional superiority, enabling it to operate freely, while adversaries could only employ asymmetric tactics like mines, speedboats, and proxy forces. Iran developed entire military doctrine around this reality, focusing on area denial rather than power projection, accepting it could never match American carrier strike groups in open battle. That calculation just changed. China's deployment creates mutual defense scenario where any American military action against Iran potentially triggers Chinese involvement, either through active defense of Chinese warships now in harm's way, or through treaty obligation to defend comprehensive strategic partner. From Beijing's perspective, this deployment serves multiple objectives simultaneously. It signals to Iran that China will not abandon its largest oil supplier and most significant Middle East strategic partner, even under American pressure. It demonstrates to other nations, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, that Chinese security commitments have teeth, making Chinese weapons sales and security partnerships more credible alternatives to American arrangements. It positions China as alternative security provider in the Middle East at exactly the moment when Gulf Arab states are hedging their bets about American reliability after 2 decades of Middle East drawdown. It creates facts on the ground that complicate American freedom of action, raising costs and risks of military options against Iranian nuclear program. And it tests American resolve. Will Washington accept Chinese naval presence in region America considered exclusive sphere of influence since 1979, or will Washington challenge it and risk broader U.S.-China confrontation? According to Dr. Toshi Yoshihara, senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments and co-author of Red Star Over the Pacific, China's Rise and the Challenge to U.S. Maritime Strategy, China is employing precisely the strategy he and his co-author warned about a decade ago. Yoshihara analyzed this deployment in a statement this morning. China is not replicating American Cold War strategy of forward-deployed carrier battle groups. They're implementing anti-access strategy in someone else's backyard. Those Type 055s don't need to control sea lanes. They just need to make American sea control prohibitively expensive. 2 destroyers with 224 vertical launch cells represents more offensive firepower than entire surface action groups from earlier eras, and they're operating from Iranian bases where American forces cannot strike without escalating to full-scale war with Iran and potentially China. Dr. Michael Kaufman, Senior Adjunct Fellow at the Center for Naval Analyses, provided additional context in an interview with Bloomberg. The critical factor is warning time. American intelligence obviously knew these ships were coming. You can't hide destroyers transiting from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf. But knowing they're coming and being willing or able to stop them are different questions. What exactly would the United States have done? Blockaded the Strait of Hormuz against Chinese warships? That's an act of war against a nuclear superpower. This is classic fait accompli strategy. By the time you're discussing whether to respond, they're already anchored in Iranian waters, and any response means shooting first. From Iran's perspective, the strategic logic is crystal clear. Tehran has spent 45 years since the Islamic Revolution trying to break American regional hegemony and sanctions pressure. The nuclear program represented one path toward that goal, providing deterrent capability that might force Washington to accept Iranian regional role. But the nuclear path brought its own problems: international isolation, devastating sanctions, and periodic military crises threatening regime survival. China's deployment offers alternative path. Instead of deterring America through nuclear weapons that don't exist yet, Iran can deter America through great power patron that does exist. The IRGC doesn't need to sink American carriers with ballistic missiles if Chinese destroyers make American planners worry about triggering U.S.-China war. This is exactly the escalation management strategy smaller powers employ when facing larger adversaries. Find a bigger friend. North Korea does it with China, Syria did it with Russia, now Iran is doing it with China. And unlike North Korea or Syria, Iran offers China something strategically invaluable: guaranteed oil supplies, Middle East foothold, and counterweight to American regional presence. From Washington's perspective, this represents nightmare scenario that American strategy has tried to prevent since the end of the Cold War. The entire post-1991 order in the Middle East rested on preventing exactly this kind of great power competition in the region. America withdrew from Afghanistan partly to free resources for great power competition with China in the Indo-Pacific. But if China is now projecting naval power into the Middle East, that geographic separation collapses. American forces face potential two-front scenario where deterring China in Taiwan Strait means accepting Chinese presence in Persian Gulf, or contesting Chinese presence in Persian Gulf means reducing deterrence in Indo-Pacific. There are 3 possible scenarios for how this develops, and each carries different probability based on current indicators. Scenario 1: symbolic deployment and withdrawal. Probability 25 to 30%. In this scenario, China's warships conduct brief port visit, participate in limited naval exercises with Iranian forces, then return to normal station in the Indian Ocean or South China Sea. This would represent political signaling rather than permanent presence shift, demonstrating support for Iran without committing to long-term Middle East naval presence that China's naval capacity cannot sustain. For this scenario to materialize, several conditions must hold. First, American restraint. If Washington does not escalate tensions or threaten immediate military action against Iran, Beijing can declare symbolic mission accomplished. Second, Chinese resource constraints. The plan operates approximately 35 major surface combatants capable of long-range deployment, and most remain committed to Indo-Pacific missions. Sustaining permanent Middle East presence requires ship rotations, maintenance cycles, and logistics networks China is still developing. Third, face-saving exit. Beijing needs narrative framework allowing withdrawal without appearing to back down under American pressure. Joint exercises, technology transfers, or diplomatic initiatives could provide that framework. Scenario 2, permanent Chinese naval presence. Probability, 45 to 50%. This scenario sees China maintain continuous naval presence in the Persian Gulf through rotating deployments, establishing Bandar Abbas as regular port of call, and potentially expanding to permanent base facilities similar to Djibouti installation. This represents strategic commitment to Middle East presence rivaling European colonial powers' historical deployments. For this scenario to unfold, China needs three things. First, Iranian willingness to host permanent Chinese presence despite historical Iranian nationalism that resisted foreign military bases. Tehran would need to calculate that domestic nationalist backlash is worth the security benefits China provides. Second, Chinese strategic commitment. Beijing would need to judge that Middle East presence is worth diverting naval assets from Indo-Pacific, suggesting China believes its regional position is secure enough to enable force projection elsewhere. Third, American acceptance. Washington would need to decide that preventing Chinese presence is not worth the costs of confrontation, essentially conceding multipolar Persian Gulf rather than maintaining American primacy. Watch for Chinese announcement of regular patrols, reports of facility construction at Bandar Abbas, and additional ship deployments rotating on 3 to 6 month cycles. Scenario 3, crisis escalation and naval confrontation. Probability, 20 to 25%. The nightmare scenario where Chinese presence directly complicates American military options against Iran, leading to inadvertent escalation or deliberate confrontation. This could unfold multiple ways. If American forces strike Iranian nuclear facilities, Chinese warships could activate air defense systems protecting Iranian airspace, forcing American aircraft to either abort missions or engage Chinese vessels. Iranian forces could stage provocations against American assets, knowing Chinese presence constrains American response options. Maritime incidents between Chinese and American vessels could spiral through miscalculation, with neither side willing to back down in front of regional audiences. This scenario becomes likely if Trump administration decides it cannot tolerate Chinese naval presence and demands withdrawal, Beijing refuses, and Washington feels compelled to demonstrate resolve through shows of force. The catastrophic version sees shooting between American and Chinese warships, triggering Article 5 commitments in reverse, where both countries must defend national honor, creating path to broader conflict that neither actually wanted over Iranian nuclear program, neither actually cares that much about in isolation. Watch for 5 critical indicators in the next 48 to 72 hours. First, Chinese ship movements. If destroyers remain anchored at Bandar Abbas beyond 1 week, permanent presence becomes more likely. If they conduct exercises, then depart eastward through Strait of Hormuz, symbolic mission interpretation gains credibility. Second, American naval positioning. If USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group that was operating in Arabian Sea repositions closer to Strait of Hormuz or into Persian Gulf itself, Washington is signaling it will not cede battle space. If the carrier maintains distance or redeploys elsewhere, Washington may be conceding Chinese fait accompli. Third, official communications between Washington and Beijing. If Secretary of State or National Security Advisor speaks with Chinese counterparts in next 72 hours, diplomatic management is being attempted. Silence suggests both sides prefer to communicate through actions rather than words, increasing miscalculation risks. Fourth, Iranian domestic messaging. If Supreme Leader Khamenei or President Pezeshkian make public statements emphasizing China relationship as strategic breakthrough, Tehran is committed to maximizing political benefit even if it increases tensions. If Iranian officials downplay significance as routine cooperation, they're providing Washington with off-ramp. Fifth, Gulf Arab reactions. If Saudi Arabia, UAE, or Bahrain issue statements expressing concern about regional militarization, they're signaling to Washington that American presence remains preferred security guarantor. If they remain silent or welcome Chinese role in regional security, they're hedging toward multipolar framework. I'm tracking this minute by minute. I have sources monitoring naval movements through commercial satellite imagery, diplomatic communications in Washington, Beijing, and Tehran, and military analysis networks parsing implications. When these destroyers move, when American carriers reposition, when diplomatic channels activate or shut down, when the next development breaks in what could become the most significant shift in Middle East power dynamics since the Cold War ended, you'll understand it here first, with the technical depth and strategic context mainstream media cannot provide. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on all notifications. You need to know what happens next, because this isn't just about 3 Chinese warships. This is about whether American dominance in the Middle East that has existed since 1979 just ended, whether great power competition has spread from Indo-Pacific into every region where American interests matter, and whether we just watched the moment the unipolar world order finally collapsed into genuine multipolar competition where America faces peer adversaries not just in theory, but with warships anchored in waters America considered its own. Drop a comment. Do you think China is committed to permanent Persian Gulf presence, or is this symbolic signaling? Do you think Trump will demand Chinese withdrawal and risk confrontation? Do you think we just watched the moment Iran successfully broke American regional hegemony by finding the one patron Washington cannot simply coerce or attack? I read every comment and I want to know what you're seeing. The Chinese destroyers are docked at Bandar Abbas right now. American carriers are repositioning. The alliance America didn't see coming has arrived. The next 72 hours determine whether this is temporary political theater or permanent strategic realignment. Thanks for watching.